Hey there, and welcome to Business Over Cocktails. I'm Lauren Najar, your host and hype woman, bringing you real talk about entrepreneurship. This is the podcast where we dive into the bold whys, the messy middles, and the game-changing aha moments that lead to success. You'll hear unfiltered stories from entrepreneurs, plus bite-sized solo episodes inside the Business Chaser series, where we cut through the noise and get straight to what actually drives sales, visibility, and growth. So whether you're here to get fired up or finally feel seen in your business journey, pull up a seat, pour your favorite drink, and let's have a real conversation. Hey all. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode around like story and non-business things. It's plainly been a very long time since I've done a solo episode. But if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to Business Over Cocktails. I am Lauren Najar. I'm the host of this podcast. And what Business Over Cocktails is usually we're going to have a story, something that is a founder telling their story or how they grew their business. And then I am in an effort to share more solo episodes coming soon. We had so many amazing guests recently that I wanted to showcase all of those guests, and we still have so many more coming. At the time of this recording, we're essentially batched out very far into 2026. So I'm excited for you to hear all of the guests that are coming up because a lot of them are super cool, still more stories to share. And I'm going to, of course, have a bigger cadence, more frequent cadence, I should say, of myself having solo episodes. So buckle up. So you can see the title of this podcast. So it's going to be an extension of my cancer journey. And if you don't know much about it, I'm not going to rehash the whole thing here, but I am going to talk about what it's like as survivorship progresses and some of the things that I've already been experiencing that might be as hard as the cancer journey itself sometimes, mindset-wise, I should say. So if you haven't listened to just kind of like my origin story and my cancer journey, there are episodes. I believe that they're the first few episodes of this podcast. So if you scroll all the way down to like the first episode, second, third episode, you will know more about me there. So really quickly, though, I am a 2-time cancer survivor of Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had cancer. I was diagnosed with cancer the first time when I was 23, and I was in remission by the time I was almost 26. Yes. It was right before my 26th birthday when I was in remission. So now I am, as of this recording, I am 13 years cancer-free. And, 13 years has gone by. I have been in remission, cancer survivor. And I will say the biggest mental game, the hardest mental game has been in survivorship. And here's why. I think that when and this is my experience, I'm not going to speak for cancer survivors everywhere, but I will share that in some of the conversations I have had with cancer survivors, that we do share a lot of the same things. When someone is going through cancer, and this could be, you probably know someone who has had cancer, right? They could be close to you. They could be not that close to you. Social media is posting GoFundMes all of the time of people that are battling illnesses. We might have extended family members or friends of friends or friends of family, whatever it is, that have had cancer. It's essentially hard to not be touched by it or affected by it. And, a lot of us will be affected by it in life as well, again, multiple times. My mom had cancer and she passed away from it, from complications with blood clots while she was battling colon cancer a second time. My grandfather passed away from stomach cancer. So, I had cancer twice. So a lot of these things, will hit you even more than once. So with that said, I think that when someone is going through cancer, it's easy to be there for that person because they are going through a lot. And regardless of what kind of cancer they have or how long their treatment is or how bad it gets, there are always people that will rally around somebody. I was fortunate because while I didn't have my parents, I had a very supportive family. And my uncle, my aunts, they definitely took me to my appointments. My now brother-in-law and my sister were so integral. I was living with my sister at the time. And, I had a very close unit of family that supported me. And then I also had so many supportive friends as the second time that I went through. The first time, not so much with the friend group. I feel that it's easy to, again, be there for, it's maybe not easy, but it is more common, I should say, to be there for someone while they're going through cancer. You want to ask them how they're doing, share their stuff, comment on their posts. And a side note, I had cancer in a time where it wasn't that common to post a lot of the private stuff we see on social media. This was 15 years ago when I initially had cancer, and it wasn't common to see people posting pictures being bald or anything. And I actually, side note, that's actually one of my biggest regrets is I don't have any pictures of me bald. I have pictures of me with wigs on. I have pictures of me with a head wrap on, so just a scarf around my head. But I wish I got pictures of me bald because all I have are memories. And then my siblings saw me, my brother-in-law saw me, my boyfriend at the time saw me, but I never had pictures of me bald. So that's a big regret. And I actually tell people who come to me for cancer advice, I'm like, you're going to hate it, but you're going to want a picture of yourself bald. But anyways, I feel that, it's more common to support people with cancer and while they're going through it. And once you hit that remission finish line or you are better and on the up and up, then that support kind of dies down. And again, that's probably very common because we expect people okay, cool, you're better now, and then you're going to get back to your life and figure things out. And anytime I share my cancerversary, so that's my milestone of how many years I've been in remission, or, recently the reason why I had an idea for this podcast is recently it was World Cancer Day, I think. I'm not too familiar with that one. I'm familiar more with National Cancer Survivor Day, which is in June, and that one means a lot more to me. World Cancer Day, I think, was recently in February, or maybe at the end of June. I think it was beginning of February. And so I shared that. And I actually, anytime I share anything about that, I always think of making people aware of the survivorship hardships that people have. Because for me, before I had cancer, I was 23 years old. I guess I just experienced a whole lot of trauma. My parents both passed away within a year and a half of each other when I was 21 and 20, almost 23 years old. Having cancer 11 months later after my dad passed away was just it was such a joke. But otherwise, I was a healthy person. I worked out. I played sports all of my life. I was not overweight. I didn't have any medical conditions at all, never broken a bone in my body, did not have any symptoms until I noticed a lump in the lower left part of my neck, at the base of my neck and kind of where my collarbone is. And I could move it and I could feel it. It was painless. I felt it after I was sick one time. I felt just this lump and it was painless. And, now that I come out on the other side of this, having gone through chemo and radiation and a stem cell transplant, multiple surgeries and biopsies, and now I'm on the other side, and yes, I'm in remission, but I have a whole host of things I need to watch out for. And granted, I think with a normal person, there are things that we need to be conscious of, right? We do need to work out. We do need to be healthy. We might have some family history of cancers as well that we have to be on the watch for. So one of those things is because my mom had colon cancer at such a young age. She was diagnosed initially at 39. My siblings and I, we have to go for colonoscopies starting at the age of 30. And I have to do that in addition to all of my other tests I have to do every year. So that's just another thing. But however, so a normal, healthy person, because if colon cancer runs in your family, you do have to get that kind of situated and tested. And I know that a lot of families might have that too. Breast cancer is another thing that you probably have to get checked out if that runs in your family, ovarian cancer, things like that. Heart disease, if it runs in your family, cholesterol, diabetes, like we all have those. However, cancer has brought me a lot of things that, sometimes it really does get stressful. It gets hard. And this might be the most vulnerable share that I'm going to share yet on the podcast. It gets hard. And every year it gets hard. And I think because since I had my daughter, it gets even harder to think that if I go in for a test, then something can come back. Before I had cancer, I never had to worry about breast cancer. I never had to worry about, because that doesn't run my family. No one in my family has ever had that. We don't have like the gene or anything. The only thing, truly throughout life would be to be aware of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, that definitely all runs in my family, cholesterol, and then colon cancer because of my mom's history. But now I on top of all of those things, I have like a heart failure risk because of the certain chemo that I had. I have to worry about breast cancer potentially because of radiation that I had in that area. I now have hypothyroidism, and that's, managed by a daily medication. I have to go for echocardiograms every 2 years, and I see a cardiologist. And despite me running and I've ran marathons, I run 5Ks every year. That's something that I still have to watch out for because radiation that I had over my heart could affect like plaque buildup. It could affect like the pumping mechanisms of my heart. And more than most people, I have to make sure that my heart is healthy. So I do a lot of running. I have to worry about thyroid cancer potentially because a lot of the radiation I had was over my neck, my chest, and over my heart as well. So I have to, every year, there's just like there's a list of things that I have to go through. I'm very grateful in the sense that I have insurance, I have a world-class medical team, and I'm very proud of myself that I keep up with all of these things every single year. I see a survivorship doctor, I see an oncologist, I see a cardiologist, I see, my regular OB as well. Like you have your normal doctors that you see. So I see like another thing too is, yes, everyone should go for skin checks, but I go for skin checks. And again, because of radiation I've experienced, a lot of times my skin could have risks with like different freckles and stuff that I have on my body. I'm very grateful for all of that. Another thing that I had to do in between having cancer both times was they were worried about fertility, and I was receiving high-powered chemo the second time around, and I actually had the ability to go through and freeze eggs. I was not with my husband at the time. I was completely single at the time, so I froze eggs to preserve fertility later in life if I wanted to. So I was 25 when I was doing that. No plans to get married anytime soon, wasn't dating anyone. And that was really hard to also come to terms with at that point. But thankfully, they're still there. Like, thankfully, I haven't needed to access them or anything. But the potential was that my fertility would be knocked out. But thankfully, it was not. There are a lot of things that have happened over the last 13 years that are hard. And I can share and make people aware of it, but without me actually like explaining it and giving you my point of view, I hope that as I'm talking, this makes you think of the people in your life that may be not sharing those things. And I think that not only have I been aware of it for a while, but it has made me so aware of it now that my daughter is here. When my husband and I we were deciding to start a family and, get pregnant for the first time, other than having a normal cycle and, thinking and feeling like everything was kind of normal, I was very nervous to even start trying because I didn't know where that would even be for me, where my levels would be and my hormones. And, there wasn't, other than like, yeah, I have a normal cycle, but I don't have any other indication of whether I can get pregnant or not. And I remember very early on thinking about potentially starting a family, or if we were going to think of like the timing and everything, I would get down on myself and I would almost feel this shame. I'm trying not to get emotional. Having the shame where my husband and I, we had been together for 5 years married for 5 years at this point, and together for 7 years at that point. And, we were kind of starting thinking like, maybe this is the right time. But I was always nervous. I think there was always a part of me that didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, because I thought we would need a million tests and all of these exams and IVF and shots. And I just thought that that was going to be exactly what our story would be. And so thankfully, because I have the medical history that I do, we were able to get testing. And so like, it's just like the normal testing that maybe normal people go through when they have been trying and they are unsuccessful after like 12 months. Because of my health history, we were able to get those tests done even well before we even started trying, because my doctors were interested to see where my levels were. And when my results came back, they were actually slightly lower than what they should be on average for a normal person my age. And at that point, I was 33 or 34 years old. And so as an average 33 or 34-year-old, my levels were a little bit lower. But again, I felt like I had a very normal cycle. I wasn't experiencing any like symptoms or hot flashes or things like that. So, it came down to it, and we decided to start trying. And it was like, we kind of like casually, like not, 9 months here and there. And we moved in the middle of that. So like there were some months where we didn't really want to like actually try and things and focus on that. But I got pregnant in June of 2022, and it ended up being a chemical pregnancy. And I remember feeling like I was freaking out. I was like, oh my gosh, like I cannot believe this. I'm not ready for this. But then within a week's time, like, within that 6 days, like we started getting really excited. And, I went in for a blood test, and like it was my whatever HCG levels were so low. And by that weekend, which was Father's Day weekend and my birthday, and it was just a really hard emotional weekend. And at that point, also, what was really heavy is that no one knew we were trying. We just kept that secret to ourselves. And so not only were we told and advised to tell people and to talk about it to help us through and not keep it inside, but there was that moment where, not only did I not want to tell anyone, but it was that moment where I felt that my body was failing me again. And the reason why I felt like that again is with Hodgkin's lymphoma, there's no direct cause to that. And so that's kind of the same thing that you're told with chemical pregnancies with, there's really no reason. And yeah, you can dig deeper and think of levels and blood work and things like that. There's probably some things that you can prevent. But with Hodgkin's lymphoma, I think that's been my biggest frog. Like, I don't know if that's the right term for it, but it's been my biggest hurdle to grasp is that, if you have lung cancer, a lot of times you smoked for years. There's always a direct cause. Hodgkin's lymphoma is not genetic. It doesn't come from smoking. It doesn't come from secondhand smoke. It doesn't come from drinking. It doesn't come from any of these things. And it can come from anything. And I think that's been my biggest thing to wrap my head around is I need to find the problem and the solution to make sure I can avoid it again. And so when it came down to understanding why I had a miscarriage, I immediately was like, okay, like what can I do for my body and what can I do to figure things out so then I can prep my body a little bit more. Thankfully, one of my clients is a hormone coach. So like I really dove deeper into what she teaches, and she definitely helped me take some of that back into my hands. But I immediately went into this moment of like, my body just isn't cooperating again, and I don't know how to help it. And that's exactly what I felt during when I had Hodgkin's lymphoma too, especially that first time where I had a lump and it was painless, but otherwise, looking back, I didn't have any other symptoms. I wasn't coughing excessively, wasn't having night sweats, and those are some symptoms with Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I think as far as survivorship goes, I'm still young enough to where I'm still looking out for these things, right? Like none of these things, except for having thyroid issues. For the rest of my life, I have to go for these tests. And, I'm getting to the point where my husband turned 40 and people that I know are in their 40s and we're getting to our late 30s and all kinds of people are going to start going for tests soon. So they'll just, I just had a head start with them and that's wonderful and great. However, it's always going to mean something else for me. Having cancer and getting diagnosed with cancer was such a shock because again, I wasn't in pain. I was just living my life. Like nothing was wrong except for this painless lump. And then I ended up having a bunch of lumps that weren't visible. But, I think that moment, that piece of the journey will always maybe haunt me in a way because I've had so many things happen in my life that came out of nowhere. And there were no signs, no symptoms. Even my mom, who had colon cancer at that time, the day before she passed away, she was outside without oxygen and sitting with my dad. And it was a beautiful, late summer day. And she was rolling around in our kitchen in a computer chair, doing the dishes, blasting music. She was attached to a long cord with her oxygen. But, by all accounts, she was supposed to live and be healthier. She was not on her deathbed. A couple of weeks before she passed away too, she was running a softball tournament and she was managing the schedules of umpires of who needs to go to what game. So it's hard for me to say that she passed away from cancer because she really didn't. She was still fighting it. And just the blood clots that she experienced, they made its way to her heart. And so that's really frustrating. So I think I struggle a lot because I had a lot of things happen to me that were so shocking and surprising in such a such a limited time within 5 years of all of that stuff happening in 5 years. And so anytime I go in for a test now, I think of everything that's riding on this test and me being healthy. And now I have this business and I have a lot of people who count on me, and now I have my daughter. And I think especially with my daughter is what has shifted for me in recent years, where it has made it just 10 times harder. And I don't know if it's the fact of, I don't want her to go through what I went through. I think, sure, that's a little bit of it, but I just don't want to miss out on her life. And, I think she's still young enough to where, yeah, she would remember me, but not really. She'd probably remember pictures and stuff. So it's hard to think about, something else happening. And so I think when it comes to survivorship and when it comes to having these tests and when it comes to just going through life, it's nice, it's when we're in between tests, I don't think about it as much. Of course, there are times where I think about it. I take thyroid medication every morning, so I think about it. But when it comes down to going in to seeing my oncologist, and I recently saw my survivorship doctor, it gets very overwhelming and it gets very hard because we go through everything that I experience. We go through all of the chemo and the different drugs and how they affect my body later in life and what to look out for. And I literally, go and see my survivorship doctor just to get a list of tests that I have to do every year. And, we have a health savings, or not health savings, we have flex spending accounts that are drained every year. And we always have to pay medical expenses out of pocket because we have to pay for more than what's in a flex spending account, which, side note, I will always be politically for healthcare, for however it favors me and other people with pre-existing conditions, because that is just, you have 2 people in the household making 6 figures and you can't afford medical care. Like, that's just wild to me. But anyways, it's hard. It's hard to go to these tests, and it's hard to go to see these doctors. But it's also bittersweet because I do like my doctors. The one thing I do want to talk about, though, and I think there's actually 2 more things that I want to say in this episode. There was something that came back on a mammogram I had 2 years ago. And for me, I think it's something that I experienced maybe as I was breastfeeding. As I was breastfeeding during that time, and I just stopped breastfeeding. And so I have had to go for diagnostic mammograms. And so I've been dealing with that, and I've been needing to go to those on a more consistent basis. And in the same year, I had a colonoscopy, which had a polyp that was removed. And of course, all simple, right? All simple, and that's fine. And it was not cancerous or anything. But in the same year as well, I had a mole removed. And I just, again, felt that there was nothing that I could do in those moments. I have to go for more consistent mammograms. I have to go for more consistent colonoscopies now because of the polyp that they found. And it was just another wake-up call of, we really don't know. And again, I probably went into those tests very confidently, like, yeah, these are just routine. I'm used to mammograms. I'm used to breast MRIs. I'm used to colonoscopies. And, I know the cadence, and I know I have to go for every 5 years for a colonoscopy. I have to go for every 6 months, either for a mammogram or an MRI for the rest of my life. But now I have to do mammograms twice a year and MRIs. And it's a lot. It's a lot to hold in, because every mammogram that you go into, you think that maybe whatever they're watching has evolved, has changed. And again, just no symptoms, no lumps felt, nothing, but, maybe that they're being more cautious than anything. So that was something I was carrying for the last couple of years that I really haven't shared. It's been stable for 2 years. So now I'm just on my regular cadence of going for an MRI and then mammogram, switching off every 6 months. I feel confident in that. And again, like, if I feel confident enough to where if something were to be wrong, I'm going for enough tests as it is that people would find things quicker and we can resolve them quicker. And as long as I just keep up with all of my tests and things like that. The other thing that I've been I've struggled with in the past is, I was pretty young when I was going through all of this, and, I wasn't married and wasn't in a position to have any children yet. And I didn't feel like my body was my own. And I think that a lot of people, if you're listening and you've been pregnant one time, number of times, or any kind of like medical thing that you've experienced where you feel like you don't have control over your body, I went through that for 4 years. And even after in remission for about 6 or 7 months, I was in menopause. I did not have my cycle. I didn't really know what was happening. I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that I didn't have my period anymore. And I didn't realize that was menopause. When I was going through chemo, I did have hot flashes. And I remember talking to like the older ladies at work, and they're like, yeah, that's menopause. But then slowly but surely things regulated, and, things got back on track. So for a long time, I just felt very foreign in my body and no control over my body. And so, the years leading up to like getting married, and then my husband and I, we didn't start really trying to have children until we were married for 5 years. And so, like, I think a lot of times that also is a while to wait. I got married when I was 29 and he was 30. And there was this moment where, like, I definitely felt pressure, but I also was just, like, not ready, because I spent a large part of my 20s trying to figure out my body again. And, I'm having thyroid issues and weight gain that I never really had to experience in my life before. And just like all of a sudden my body's just not responding like it used to. So it was really hard for me to think about giving my body to another thing. And so the moment came and I was pregnant and then had that miscarriage. Again, I felt foreign in my body. And even if it's a chemical pregnancy, it was weird. My cycle was weird. My body felt weird. Hormones were all out of whack. It took me a while to feel regulated again. But by the time I was regulated, thankfully, that's when we got pregnant with my daughter, and it was successful and it was such a good pregnancy. But then I think what happens after that is, then you go through postpartum. And that was a big struggle for me personally. I had a C-section, so the recovery was really difficult. I feel like sometimes I still am recovering, and here we are 2.5 years later. I don't know what's normal. I don't know what is normal or not normal. I think that I've learned that our journeys are all different. But I have a really hard time thinking about, possibly having additional children because I'm giving up my body again. And that's kind of how I feel about it, is that for a very long time in my 20s, and even sometimes in my 30s, where I felt like, and I kind of want you to think about this too, right? Like if you are just a normal human being and you're healthy, regardless and you're not getting pregnant, you're not trying to get pregnant, anything, it's just normal, right? And you just can focus on your health and your weight and what you eat, and you don't have to think about anyone else other than yourself. And for a very long time in my adulthood, I couldn't just think of that. And when I think of the possibility of just like all of the work that I've done, post cancer and post chemo and radiation and remission, and then going through 2 pregnancies essentially, then postpartum and C-section recovery was a little difficult. And here we are 2.5 years later. And I feel like even for you to feel like yourself takes a while too, like at least 18 months. At least that's what it was for me. I find it really hard to wrap my head around the fact of, can I give my body up again where it's not mine? And so that's really hard to think about. And that's kind of why, the questions when people ask you when you're going to have another child are dumb anyways. No one should ask that question to anybody. You never know what people are going through. But when people do ask me that question of, oh, do you think you're going to have another one? I understand it's innocent, but it is such a nuanced question for me because I think emotionally I do. There are moments I really do. There are moments that I really don't. But that is the hardest part to think about, is to give up my body again. And I think a lot of that is coming from cancer, because I think my whole life I thought I would have 2 kids. I just kind of had that number, and that was just, I guess that's kind of what everyone does, right? And I never in my mind thought I would only have 1. So I think that it's hard to think about when I, again, had no control over cancer and having it twice. And, I love and I appreciate how I can just live for my body now. I think that I emotionally, like, there's so many things that I would love to give a sibling to my daughter. That's the part where having cancer really sucks. And the survivorship of it all. The survivorship is the hardest part, especially when you're young, and you can have a bunch of different outcomes, because there are people whose fertility have been knocked out, and you have to go to different lengths if you do want to start a family. There are people that will never be able to do that. And so one of the things that I've learned over the years is, for years I've been saying, yeah, I go to Northwestern in Chicago, and it's one of the best hospitals in the country, if not like one of the best ones in the world. People travel there to go for everything. I think it's really hard it's easy to gaslight yourself, and this is something I recently realized that I was doing. I was gaslighting myself into thinking like my feelings weren't valid around this. Like I need to be grateful. I need to be fortunate because I am cancer free and I get to go and yeah, these tests suck, but I'm able to go to this hospital and, these doctors and they're amazing. And I was just kind of shoving down my feelings of like, no, I need to be great. I'm grateful and I'm fortunate and all this stuff. And through a recent therapy session, my therapist was like, yeah, but you're gaslighting yourself. Like you need to feel these feelings. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. So here we are. This is my journey with survivorship. This is what I experience on a pretty regular basis. There's certain times of year where I have like a lot of these appointments and all of this comes running back. I wanted to record this episode because again, like I said at the beginning, everyone has been touched by cancer. You might have loved ones, people, you might have come into their lives after cancer. That was my husband. We weren't together until I was over a year in remission. Funny enough, he was my boss for a while. He was an assistant manager and he was my superior. We weren't together or anything, but he did see me go through cancer the second time. So he actually did get a little bit of a front row seat to that. However, he didn't fully understand anything until we started, we were together and now he's been part of the survivorship journey. And, that was another thing we struggled with too I struggled with is like, if he wanted to start a family, and thankfully he was kind of like on board with whatever I wanted to do at that time. And he wanted to honor my body. And I was putting this immense pressure on myself that he has to go through all these hoops and stuff because of all of these extra things that I experienced. And so that was pressure again I was putting on myself. But I know a lot of people experience that. A lot of people feel shame around all of these things and their partners might not be in it with them. And that happened with my first relationship that I had when I had cancer the first time. So I hope that I'm able to shed a very bright light on survivorship because that work is never done. The feeling of being a cancer survivor never leaves. Yes, it might get easier, but there's always going to be some sort of grief. There are things that make me angry still. There are things that I deal with on a daily basis. And there are things that, I look back and, I'm 38 years old now and it's still young by a lot of means. And I look back at this person who's 23 years old and I look at 23-year-olds now and I'm like, oh my goodness, these are children. These people are children and they're going through these very adult things, let alone without their parents by their sides. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you for listening. I hope that this brought some light to some situations that maybe, or some people that have experienced that. And if you are a cancer survivor yourself and you're feeling any sort of these feelings, you're not alone, and my DMs are always open to chat with you on this. So I appreciate you listening. This is probably my most vulnerable episode ever, my most vulnerable episode I've ever shared. So I appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. And if you have any feedback or want to chat more in the DMs, feel free to message me. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Business Over Cocktails, where real stories and bold business moves come to life. If this episode lit something up in you, share it with a friend, tag me at Lauren Najar or the podcast page at Business Over Cocktails. Make sure to leave a quick review as well. It helps more than you know. Until next time, keep chasing what matters and building the business that feels like you. Cheers!